To understand why the Chery iCar V27 matters, America first has to stop misreading what the iCar brand has been doing. Chery did not enter this space by immediately swinging at the Ford Bronco, the Land Rover Defender, or the Mercedes G-Class. It started smaller. Chery launched iCar as a separate new energy brand in 2023, then put the iCar O3 into the market as its first model in early 2024. To many Western observers, that made the brand look like another youth-focused design-heavy EV side project with clever software and boxy styling. That was the mistake. The smaller iCar vehicles were not the final product. They were the training ground. They were the low-risk battlefield where Chery could test digital architecture, user interface logic, and brand positioning before moving into a far more lucrative and strategically sensitive class. Now the scale has changed. The V27 is iCar's largest SUV to date, its first EREV model, and a vehicle that sits at roughly Defender-sized dimensions, stretching to about 4.9 meters long, with a 2,910mm wheelbase. Industry reports around its rollout and launch positioned it not as a niche curiosity, but as a serious extended-range off-road SUV aimed at the space long dominated by Western legacy brands. In other words, this is not Chery experimenting anymore. This is Chery mobilizing its industrial mass and stepping into one of the last segments where heritage once acted like armor. For Detroit and for Britain's off-road aristocracy, that should not be read as a new model launch. It should be read as a breach in the wall. For years, the strongest argument against electrifying a serious off-road vehicle was not ideology. It was logistics. A battery SUV might feel impressive near a city, but once you leave paved corridors and head into remote country, the old fear returns immediately. What happens when the charge runs low and there is no charger for another 100 miles? That is the exact psychological wall Chery is trying to break with the V27. Publicly reported launch specifications describe it as an extended-range electric SUV with a 1.5T range extender, rear or dual-motor layouts. Up to 335 kilowatts in AWD form a CLTC battery electric range of about 210 kilometers and a total CLTC range of up to 1,200 kilometers. That matters because Chery is not asking the buyer to choose between EV torque and fuel-back distance. It is trying to collapse those two worlds into a single off-road package, and the architecture matters even more than the headline numbers. In a series hybrid or extended-range EV layout, the electric motor drives the wheels, while the combustion engine works primarily as a generator feeding electrical energy into the system, instead of mechanically driving the axles in the traditional sense. That is exactly why this format is so dangerous to the old off-road narrative. A traditional turbo V6 or V8 has to translate combustion chaos directly into wheel motion. An EREV can let the engine do one job, make electricity, while the motors do the crawling climbing and low-speed torque delivery. For an American buyer, that changes the conversation completely. You are no longer choosing between a Bronco-style mechanical identity and EV-style instant torque. You are being offered a third-answer electric propulsion for the trail liquid fuel endurance for the map. In practical terms, that means a vehicle can still deliver the sharp immediate torque response that makes electric drivetrains so effective on loose surfaces, while keeping the long-range security blanket that off-road buyers in Utah, Colorado, Arizona, or rural Texas still trust. This is why the V27 should not be dismissed as another hybrid experiment. It is a direct assault on the belief that off-road electrification must always end in compromise. This is the point where a lot of electric off-road projects collapse. A clever powertrain means very little if the vehicle underneath it is only pretending to be rugged. In the United States, the benchmark for serious trail credibility is still brutally simple. The structure has to survive punishment, not just look good in a launch video. That is why Ford still sells the Bronco with body-on-frame construction. and why Jeep still treats the Wrangler's fully boxed frame as central to its strength, flexibility, and durability. Toyota says the same thing about the Land Cruiser's ladder frame logic, explicitly tying body-on-frame design and higher chassis rigidity to harsh condition endurance. In other words, when Western brands want to signal authentic off-road intent, they do not start with mood boards. They start with structure. That context matters because Chery is not presenting the V27 as a soft crossover wearing a costume. Publicly released details position it as a 5-seat off-road SUV with classic squared-off proportions, a side-hinge tailgate, an external rear spare tow hook in dimensions of roughly 4,909 millimeters by 1,976 millimeters with a 2,910 millimeter wheelbase. It is also the largest model under the iCar name so far, and Chery has framed it as the brand's first EREV flagship, rather than a lifestyle side project. That does not automatically prove the V27 can outlast a Bronco in Moab or a Land Cruiser on a punishing desert route. But it does prove something strategically important. Chery understands that if this category is going to be taken seriously, the physical package cannot be urban first and trail second. It has to look, package, and position itself like a machine built for impact, loads awkward articulation, and real-world abuse. And that is where the threat becomes more serious than the badge suggests. If a Chinese brand can combine extended-range electric propulsion with the visual packaging proportions and hardware intent of a genuine off-road SUV, then the old Western advantage starts to narrow. Heritage brands have long relied on an unspoken assumption that even if rivals catch up in software, they will still struggle to build something physically believable in this class. The V27 is dangerous because it attacks that assumption directly. It says ruggedness is no longer protected by history alone. It can be industrialized, electrified, and scaled. This is where the old off-road order starts to look vulnerable. The Western icons still rely heavily on mechanical credibility, and for good reason. Ford markets the Bronco around hardware like front and rear locking differentials, while Jeep still treats locking differentials and the Rocktrack 4x4 system as core pillars of Wrangler capability. Those systems work, and they earn their reputation the hard way. But they are still built around a familiar logic when traction breaks down hardware steps in to redistribute it. Even Ford's newer aids, such as Trail Turn Assist, are still enhancements layered onto that mechanical foundation, not a replacement for it. The V27 threatens that philosophy not because it erases physics, but because it changes how quickly a vehicle can respond to physics. Publicly reported specifications describe the V27's all-wheel drive version as using an extended range system with electric motors and up to 335 kilowatts of output. In that kind of layout, the wheels are being driven electrically, not by a combustion engine trying to send torque through a long mechanical chain under constantly shifting load. That matters because torque vectoring in its simplest form is the controlled allocation of torque between driven wheels and electric drive systems, are especially well suited to fast software-led intervention. For an American driver, the implication is serious. On a loose Colorado climb, a muddy ranch track in Texas, or a slick forest trail after freezing rain, the argument is no longer just about which SUV has the tougher transfer case. It is about which one can sense grip loss, reallocate force, and preserve momentum with less drama and less wasted motion. That does not automatically mean the V27 has already dethroned Bronco or Wrangler in the real world, but it does mean the battlefield is shifting. Off-road capability is no longer only a contest of steel gears and locking hardware. It is becoming a contest of computation speed control logic and how intelligently a vehicle can turn electrons into traction. This is the part most launch videos try to rush past because thermal management is where engineering promises usually get exposed. It is easy to claim range power and off-road confidence on a clean spec sheet. It is much harder to keep those promises alive when the vehicle is pulling weight uphill in desert heat, crawling at low speed with limited airflow, or waking up after a sub-zero night with a cold battery and a long road ahead. That matters for the V27 because Chery is not positioning it as a city EV with rugged styling. It is positioning it as a full-size extended-range off-road SUV reportedly, with up to 335 kilowatts of output and up to 1,200 kilometers of CLTC total range, which means its real credibility depends on surviving thermal stress, not just advertising around it. In cold weather, battery systems lose performance if temperature control is weak. As ambient temperature drops, EV power consumption rises because the battery and cabin both need thermal energy. In hot weather, the problem flips. Sustained load can overheat the battery motors and power electronics, reducing performance or forcing protective throttling. Towing raises the temperature burden even further. That is why thermal discipline matters so much in an electrified off-road platform. That is why the V27's threat is not just about having an EREV badge. It is about entering a segment where thermal discipline decides whether the architecture is real or fake. Chery has not publicly disclosed every cooling loop detail for the V27 in the sources reviewed, so it would be irresponsible to pretend we have a full factory schematic. But the engineering reality is already clear. A vehicle promising electric trail torque, fuel-backed long distance, and heavy off-road utility must manage the battery, the electric drive system, and the generator as one coordinated thermal ecosystem. If Chery has solved that well enough for real-world punishment, then this stops being a novelty from China and becomes something far more dangerous, an off-road platform that can keep delivering when heat, cold, and load would normally expose the weakness in electrified hardware. The real danger of the Chery iCar V27 is not that it arrives as one more Chinese SUV with aggressive styling and a big range claim. The danger is that it enters one of the last emotionally protected segments in the global auto industry with a very different logic. Public reporting around its March 2026 launch positioned the V27 as iCar's first flagship EREV off-road SUV, with all-wheel drive output up to 335 kilowatts and total CLTC range up to about 1,200 kilometers. Those numbers matter, but not because they make for a flashy headline. They matter because they signal that the fight is moving away from the old Western formula of selling heritage mechanical toughness and static hardware, as if those advantages were untouchable. What changes the equation is the architecture behind that kind of product. In the broader industry, software-defined vehicles are valuable because over-the-air updates can improve not just infotainment, but core functions such as powertrain behavior and vehicle dynamics over a vehicle's life, while hardware and software become less tightly locked to one another. That does not prove every promise made about the V27 has already been validated on American trails, but it does support the central warning in this script. If off-road SUVs move toward connected, updatable software-led control systems, then legacy brands built around fixed hardware cycles face a structural problem, not just a temporary competitor. A Bronco Wrangler or Defender still carries enormous real-world credibility, but credibility alone is no longer a moat if the rival platform gets better after delivery, while the older one mainly gets older. That is why the V27 should be read as a warning, not a curiosity. It suggests that the premium off-road segment is starting to absorb the same industrial shift that already reshaped phones, consumer electronics, and mainstream EVs. The center of value moves from fixed mechanical identity to programmable capability. If that transition accelerates, then the next battle for off-road leadership will not be won by the company with the most famous badge or the loudest engine note. It will be won by the company that can integrate structure energy traction and software into one living system and keep improving it faster than Detroit Jeep Land Rover and the rest of the old guard can respond.